Now today we'll start on the subject of characterization, which of course we won't finish in one day, but we'll take this session and the next one. To begin with, I want to call your attention to the fact that while we dealt with plot and theme, the most important philosophical issue involved was metaphysics, in effect. The relationship of man to existence, the nature of existence, the nature of man and free will. When we come to characterization as a technical issue, I mean, as the issue on which you would have to be most subconsciously clear, is epistemology. Namely, by what means do you perceive character and by what means do you present it? I'm going to ask you a few questions first, so as to lead you to the realization of the way in which you have to be very conscious of human epistemology, or of having the right idea about human epistemology in order to know how to present the kind of character you want to present. So the first question I'd like to ask, and don't all answer at once, that is, if one answers and there's a general agreement, I'll tell you in advance this is not a poll, but merely the nature of an illustration. We'll start with Arrowsmith. Who do you think was the best drawn character? And let me define one particular point. I don't mean the personality you like best, not the character you consider most moral, but the best characterization. In other words, the character that you understood best. Would anyone care to express an opinion? Go ahead.
I'd say the most consistent that I can think of offhand is Madeline Fox.
You consider that the best characterization?
Well, no, I'd say the most consistent. There is a good characterization, very good characterization in Leora Poser.
Now wait, that is, you didn't quite answer the question, because the issue of consistent is already an issue to discuss under the context of characterization, and I might challenge you on that statement. The question is, which character came across to you most clearly?
I said Leora.
Leora. Does everybody agree, more or less? Or are there dissenters? Go ahead.
Sure, I understand the question, but I would say Gottlieb, if I understand.
Was Gottlieb clearer to you as a personality? Did you feel you understood him better?
I understood parts of him better.
In other words, the class is not quite clear on what is meant by characterization to begin with. How would you define characterization?
Me?
Yeah, you.
The presentation of the attributes of a person in such a way that the totality adds up to a comprehensible human being.
Well, you could put it that way, yes. I could put it briefer. The nature of a human personality, the total of a character that comes across to you as a specific human being. You would say Gottlieb.
No, there were parts of him that I never did understand. I couldn't integrate with the other things, and that's another.
Now, the reverse question. The presentation of Arrowsmith himself, we are never convinced of that man's actual devotion to science. I must confess here that I read Arrowsmith years ago, and I started rereading it and even bought a new copy for this purpose, and that I could not go very far. I literally could not, which is a different issue, which I'll explain to you later. I mean, my reason was plain boredom, but I don't want to prejudice the class in that respect, except that you know how I feel about naturalistic novels. Yeah, that's one of the best of its kind. Reading it today, it was already so dated that it was extremely difficult to read. Therefore, I only went far enough to remind myself of the general idea so that I will have some specific touches to cite for you. Therefore, if you cite events further on in the book, I may not remember the specific events, which won't hamper us. If you want to refer to certain situations, merely explain briefly what event or touch you mean. I read enough to be able to give you the illustration. However, you'll notice all my illustrations will be mainly from the early part of the book or the later part. I looked at the beginning and the end, and I skipped solidly through the middle, because I already saw enough for the purposes of illustration for this class. Now observe at the beginning, the author starts with an unusually triumphant opening that is quite unusual for Sinclair Lewis. It is almost in the romantic style. That is the introduction of the girl on the covered wagon, pioneer wagon, that is driving the wagon alone at the age of 14 with a sick father and children in the background, and she is determined not to stop and ask for help, but to drive on. Then paragraph, this was the great-grandmother of Martin Arrowsmith. Now that is an excellent opening. I observe that for that kind of opening, one would need a tremendous character to follow, because the opening was literally like a blast of trumpet. Observe what happens thereafter. You meet a boy sitting in an office and reading. A great deal, a very intelligent, observant detail is given about the nature of the small-town doctor's office, about the doctor himself. The atmosphere is created very convincingly, but you know nothing about the boy except that he likes to work in that office or help the doctor and to read. As characterization, one would say, all right, that is something that one learns about the boy. It's unusual for a boy of that age to want to work in the doctor's office. It might indicate a certain kind of future ambition or passion for medicine. But the very next touch that's introduced is that he liked to play with the boys in the small town and to bring them in at night to show them the skeleton with the gold tooth. Do you remember that touch? And he flashes a flashlight and scared the boys with this. Now I submit that that touch alone destroyed the earnestness of the characters thereafter. And I mention it as an illustration of the fact to what fatal extent, fatal in the sense that it's crucial and that no writer has any escape from it. Art is selectivity. Realistically, it would be quite possible for Arrowsmith to have been a very earnest, very devoted crusader of science, who in childhood might have pulled precisely that kind of stunt, and it might have meant nothing in particular, just a prank of the moment. But when you draw a character, everything that you write about him acquires significance by the mere fact of being included. That is a principle I want you to remember. I will discuss it much greater length when we come to style. But the mere fact of inclusion in any work of fiction, of any touch, acquires enormous significance by reason of the following fact. Nobody can impersonally list everything, as we discussed before. You cannot in words recreate the total reality of every minute detail about anything, neither about a person, nor a description, nor an event. Therefore, that which you choose to include, or that which you choose to omit also, is significant. If a boy is introduced, on one side, as seriously interested in medicine, and on the other side, as playing silly, childish pranks, the earnestness of that boy's devotion to science is undercut immediately. Now, I mention this in detail because all the subsequent treatment of Arrowsmith follows exactly the same pattern. You see him going to school, and you learn a lot about his relationship with the other boys and how he feels towards his fraternity, etc. But his attitude towards medicine is given in fragmentary bits, almost as if the author himself is a repressor, which I suspect he was. just by the nature of the writing. His devotion to science all through his college years is given almost apologetically. Did you observe that Sinclair Lewis himself makes a joke of the boy's youthful enthusiasm, or his admiration for Max Gottlieb, or his arguments with professors, and the tone, the approach to writing, and the kind of events or dialogues that the author selects always sound patronizingly gentle and friendly, kind of like the friendly amusement of an older man looking at this amusing, ambitious boy. Did you notice that tone? Not only in the narrative, but in the whole approach to the kind of thing that we are told about Arrowsmith's career in college. There are a few touches where you do feel that the boy is really devoted to his work. Notably, again, a somewhat romantic touch, where he sees Gottlieb for the first time coming out of a building and he sings that he has a cape, and it's a heroic figure. Why was that a good touch? Because it gave you specifically what the boy felt. It didn't merely say he was crazy with admiration for Gottlieb. It dramatized it, it showed it. That was convincing. Most of the other references to his attitude towards Gottlieb were either brief narrative or undercut by that friendly tone of amusement. On the other hand, much too much detail was given to his social relationships and to his concern with fraternities and with being a regular fellow. As an aside here, I would question the validity of the idea that a man who had a great single-track passion for science, in the way Arrowsmith later is presented, that such a man in college would be one of the fellows. Any man with any kind of ambition or seriousness would be much more of an outsider in his youth and adolescence than in fact in later years. It's particularly in youth that a man who has a serious central ambition is going to be resented and misunderstood by others. Any case history you ever want to hear about, the real clash of a man with others always occurs in his youth, and you all know with what kind of disastrous later consequence. But if a man is marked by a special ambition, the break between him and others will be more so. Yet, in this case, Arrowsmith is presented as just an average boy with no particular character trait that would separate him from others. Only others take medicine lightly and he takes it very seriously. Otherwise, he's just one of the boys. It is that sort of thing that undercut the characterization. And throughout his later career and throughout his romance, what do you see? A man who blunders helplessly. You know that he is devoted, you know the kind of things he does later and the kind of chances he takes and the struggle and all that, but not at any point, except a few things dealing specifically with medicine, not at any point do you feel any kind of driving force in that man. The attempt to make him a regular fellow, the attempt to separate his private or social life from his attitude towards his science is what undercuts that characterization. As you finish the book, would you have said that you had a clear idea of what was the motive power of Arrowsmith? What made him tick, in effect? What was his essence? Not particularly. On the other hand, the character of Gottlieb, who has much less space in the book, is much more convincing. Why? Observe, he is drawn in one particular key. He is consistent with a fierce, violent devotion to his science, contempt for others, a kind of a slightly exaggerated European idealistic bitterness, but everything he does and every line of dialogue he's given is consistent with that. If you projected the character of Gottlieb, would you feel that you know what makes him tick? Yes. In a certain sense, you get that unmistakable impression that this man means it. He really is a hero of science in his own way. That's all he cares about. Now, this does not mean that you have to present every character in a single key, that you must take only one attribute or one passion, and that's all that you have to write about. No, it does not mean that. But it does mean that you have to integrate a character. That if a character has contradictory premises, you have to show the contradiction. You have to show why and how the particular contradiction exists in him. You cannot draw a character as if he were a mind and body split. In effect, are two separate lines, never clashing nor integrating. I mean by this the presentation of Arrowsmith himself. That his attitude towards science and his fumbling helplessness about everything else do not go together. If a character like that existed, or to make him fully convincing, one would have to then be shown the reason of this kind of conflict. Either show it as a conflict or integrate the two. But in this case, neither was done. The two elements in him simply coexist. That is why it's not as good a characterization as the lesser characters. Now take the character of Leora, the wife. That I think is the best characterization there. Why? Because there is a complete consistency about everything she does. From the first introduction in the story, there is a kind of direct simplicity about the girl, which remains in all different circumstances, and very complicated circumstances. In relation to her first encounter with Arrowsmith's present fiancé, and later on in relation to his whole career. From the first moment we meet her, you know that here is a girl who faces life directly, who is very brave, who has certain kind of premises, and certain very bad lines of dialogue, as an aside. I'll tell you in a moment which. But she acts on those premises, and she speaks. Even every word she utters is consistent with the way she's introduced. And we see her more and more fully in the book, but she never changes in essence. What bad lines of dialogue do I mean? Well, one inexcusable line where she tells him, I'm just a simple, ordinary woman. And I'm sure that in some kind of not fully exact way, that's how Lewis saw her. But in fact, she's not that at all. I just resent, as a philosophical issue, this is an aside, the fact of labeling a character that way. The fact that she's not an ambitious creator on her own is not the same thing as saying, I'm just a little woman. Outside of that, observe that what she did was self-explanatory. From her first introduction, you never had to wonder why she does things that way. You felt it would be like her to do that. What creates that feeling in the reader? The fact that every action, every decision of the girl, and even her dialogue were consistent. On the other hand, Madeline is not so good a characterization. I was surprised that you picked her as the best, because I wouldn't even call her consistent. She's totally superficial. Then you saw a girl who is a phony, and she's presented as a kind of artsy poser with pretensions in a very superficial way. That is, you never know why the girl is that way. There's no deeper premises presented than just the phoniness. She always talks about her parties, and she talks about literature with a capital L, and nothing more. You don't know what is the motive of this girl. Leora is at least shown in every aspect. You know what is her serious side, why she would be devoted to her husband, why she went after him in the same way she went after the nursing career. But when you present a phony, that's not yet a characterization. What is necessary to make us understand that phony is what makes that phony tick. Why that motive? You never learned that about Madeline. And this brings me to an important point about naturalistic form of characterization. First, observe this, that when we speak about characterization, we really speak about the presentation of motives. We understand a person if we understand what makes them commit the actions which they commit. If a person acts in a contradictory manner and the motives are never presented, then it's the same error as the story with which I opened this course, as the Sinclair story. If you remember, if one says the person acts this way because he's crazy, that's not a plot and it's not a characterization. You have learned nothing. This is where epistemology comes in. Ask yourself, how do you know anything about people? What is the process by which you judge the people around you, in fact, in real life? When you say, so-and-so, oh, I know him or her very well, somebody else will say, I don't know, I've just had slight acquaintance and I cannot judge. What is it that you're speaking about? When you know a person very well, it really means you know their motives. You know, on the ground of observation, what kind of actions to expect from them in the future. Granted, free will, incidentally, you can never know it as an absolute. But if you know a person well and know their basic premises, you will know what makes that person tick, what is the motivation, and then you could say, I know this person. When you say, I don't know a person very well, it means exactly this. You do not know enough to see beyond the superficial actions of the moment. But the important thing is this. By what means do you know anybody? Only by means of their outward actions. There is no way for you to know directly another consciousness or another soul except by means of physical manifestations, their actions and their words. Not their words in the sense of a philosophical declaration, but their words in the context of their actions. Now the same applies to characters in fiction. You consider a characterization convincing or not, according to whether the actions of a character have given you an indication of the kind of motive that moves this action. And if it's a contradictory personality or a personality with a conflict, then to say, I understand this character means I understand the kind of conflict that exists behind this person's actions. Now that means that the actions which you show have to be integrated. Integrated to what? To your understanding of the motives, of the inner premises of the person, which you will then project in action and which the reader will grasp by means of these actions. You remember I talked about the same kind of circle in relation to plot. That if you project an abstract theme, you have to then devise the concrete events from which the reader will derive that original abstract theme which your events were devised to illustrate. Same with characterization. If you want to project a convincing character, you have to have an idea of the kind of basic premises or motivations which will move this person's actions and words. Words in this sense are part of a man's actions, meaning physical manifestations. which the other characters in the book observe and which you, the reader, observe. And by means of these actions, you will then arrive at a knowledge of what is at the root of this character. You will then be able to say this action is consistent, but that action is not. On what ground do you say? On the ground of what the actions presented to you have implied about the motives of the character acting. It's in this sense that also some of Arrowsmith's actions are very clearly motivated by his devotion to science, which is presented in various actions and statements, and it is dramatized convincingly. You learn from what he does that he is devoted to science. On the other hand, what motivates him in his relation to his friends or to his women is never fully clear. And whichever helpless vagueness he has there is never integrated with whichever strengths he has as a crusading scientist. The two elements are there in the character. They do not logically fall together, nor are there in any kind of real conflict. That is why the character reads as if he's slightly out of focus. Whereas Gottlieb and Leora, as the most consistent, are very clearly projected. I want to emphasize again, it does not mean that you can't have a character with tremendous conflicts and contradictions, but then that has to be consistent. In other words, let us say if you have a character who has a minor Bible split, whichever is philosophical issue you might choose, you might then select the actions in such a way that is dramatized, so the reader can get an idea, this is what's the trouble with this character. Now, the strange thing about the naturalist method of characterization, not strange, but simply outstanding. I mean, the point that I want to call your attention to particularly is observe only the immediate motive of the action. Immediately under the surface is given and nothing deeper. For instance, now I ask you to contrast Arrowsmith and Howard Roark. About which of the two men do you know more? And now this is not as a question of flattery, so that if anyone thinks he knows Arrowsmith better, please say so. Whom do you understand better? As a person. Go ahead.
Roark.
Why?
Well, I would like to first raise a point about Arrowsmith, which I'm not quite clear on. From what you're saying, I get the impression that, are you saying that he is a crusading scientist and that this is not integrated with the rest of his character? Because I had understood from my reading of the book that there isn't even a conflict there as to whether or not he will be a crusading scientist or whether he will take a different, a more popular approach to science.
Oh, well, there is that conflict, but he ultimately resolves it and goes into the jungle.
The crusading scientist is a very strong element in his character. And Howard Roark is consistent not only in his actions and in his speech, but one thing which I liked very early in the book, which I can contrast the two men, is that when you present Howard Roark physically, you're describing him also character-wise. Whereas, and I'll quote here what I disliked about Arrowsmith. When he lifted his head to listen, his right eyebrow slightly higher than the left rose and quivered in his characteristic expression of energy, of independence, and hints that he could fight. None of this comes out in the story. He isn't a man of independence. This is used as part of the physical characterization, but it isn't. He
is in a naturalistic sort of way. In other words, even though he has hesitations about the commercial career, and early in the story he has him think, I don't know what is the truth and what is the right, and a few doubts like that are thrown in, observe that ultimately, even though he doesn't have the conscious Rourke-like philosophical conviction of being right, his actions do carry him strictly in the service of science.
But you see, he's...
With a few sentences detours about his women, etc.
Well, you were given descriptions about his independence and his strength, and you see him sobbing later on in the story on several occasions. This didn't, none of it ever gelled in my mind. I didn't know what to expect from that. From Howard Rourke, every time he was faced with a conflict between people and reality, every time he was presented with a choice of compromise, he always acted consistently. You knew that this was a man who would act on certain premises which he held, which were very important to him. Reality, every time he was presented with a choice of compromise, he always acted consistently. You knew that this was a man who would act on certain premises which he held, which were very important to him.
Then you say, you understand now Rourke clearer because he's more single-tracked. That isn't the only issue. However, just to answer you about Arrowsmith, you see, what comes across, what is the total effect of the character, is that here is a man who had a lot of conscious contradictions, or not so much contradiction as doubts. He was forever searching himself and not being able to formulate anything as a philosophical conviction, not too decisively. Because even the last line is, we'll struggle, we'll try this, but we'll probably fail. It is that, it isn't pessimism, it's modesty. What characterizes him is that he is not a superstructure thinker. That is, he does not consciously identify his premises and function on them. But his premises are right, in effect. I think that's the author's intention. That with all his conscious doubts and lack of firm philosophical formulation, he acts in the right way. That is, his actions, in spite of all his hesitation, all carry him to his one love, which is the pursuit of pure science. And he's quite ruthless about it. Because observe the kind of things he does during the epidemic. That nothing counts, not even his wife, if he has to go somewhere to investigate some new germs.
But isn't that a man rising to an occasion, rather than a man who is consistently...
Well, it's rising to an occasion because the premise that would permit him to rise is there, and it has been shown throughout his life. Some element that was always present, and observe his whole trend, even though he runs with the boys early in the book. He's the only one who goes after Gottlieb. He is the most serious of Gottlieb's students. So that whichever superficial doubts or deviations he has, his main line is scientific. But what is never explained is then why the doubt. Or why this kind of wishy-washy hesitation. How is that reconciled with the fact that his basic premise is quite strong and he acts on it? That is what makes the character vague. But here is the thing, the particular aspect in which I wanted to contrast the characterization of Arrowsmith and the characterization of Rourke. Not now comparing literary values, but only the method of romantic fiction and the method of naturalistic fiction. In Arrowsmith, Sinclair Lewis gives us, in effect, presents as Arrowsmith's motivation the fact that he is devoted to science. And all the actions pertaining to his career. If I say that characterization is the art of giving us the motive powers, the motivations behind the character, well, we learn this much. In order to understand his actions in relation to medicine, we are given to understand and presented clearly that the man is devoted to the science of medicine. Period. Do you know anything deeper than that? No. Now, in Rourke, I tell you, this man's actions are motivated by his love for the profession of architecture. But I don't stop there. Then I go deeper. I say, what is the meaning of a love for a creative profession? Deeper. What is then his clash with society? Deeper. What are the motives of his enemies? and what is his motive, and why the two have to clash. And from the first layer of action, in effect, the action concerns the struggle of an architect. I take it all the way down to a fundamental metaphysical question, the clash of an independent mind versus a second-hand mind. In Arrowsmith, all that you know is that Arrowsmith is motivated by love of pure science. Some of the other young men who were in college with him, some of those whom he doesn't approve, are motivated by what? Love of money. Or they're after an easy practice or prestige and conformity. That's given as sufficient motivation. Now it is motivation. I mean, within the presentation of that kind of motive, the characters are well drawn. What was the name of that Dwyer or Dewar?
Angus Dew.
Yes. That's kind of the Peter Keating in the story. The smart young man who is after money and prestige and manipulating people. All we know about him is that he is unscrupulous, not interested in medicine, but more interested in material advantages, let's say. And within that kind of motivation, he's presented rather clearly as a consistent character. You can see people like that around you. And he's consistent because the author has indicated what moves him, but he's indicated what I call just the first why. That to understand the personality is like peeling one onion skin off after another. First you understand the immediate, most apparent motive behind an action. Then you ask yourself, but why this motive? And you peel another skin and you go into deeper motivation, etc., until you come down to the fundamentals of a personality. Well, the same applies to characterization in fiction, and the particular distinction between the naturalistic method and the romantic method is the fact that the naturalist will tell you the motivation of about one or two onion skins, which is about what you would observe in reality if you do not go into very abstract thought about the nature of man and of human motivation. What you would observe superficially, and by that I don't mean a stupid observer, because Lewis is not that by any means. He's a very perceptive observer, but when I say superficially, I mean in the line of your inquiry. How deeply does your inquiry go? What you can observe about people in real life around you, if you are a sensitive observer, you will be able to deduce one or two layers of motivation behind people, and using only that, you will present characters convincingly on about the kind of level that you see around you if you look observantly but non-philosophically. What a romantic method of characterization does is to look not only at the immediate onion skin, but as far deep as the author can go. Therefore, when I present Rourke, I do not rest his characterization only on the fact of here is a man motivated by passion for architecture. But I go into the root of what is the meaning of a man's passion for architecture or for any creation. Deeper than that, why? What does that have to rest on? Just to rest on independent mind. What is the moral meaning of an independent mind? And that foreshortened the kind of questions which are presented in action behind Rourke's character. That is Rourke's motivation, and the action of the story projects that. Now take Peter Keating. The character in Arrowsmith is shown as a kind of Peter Keating, and you are shown that he wants prestige and money and conventional success. I show the same thing with Peter Keating, but I go several onion skins deeper. I ask myself and present to the reader, why does a man choose to go after money and conventional prestige? What's the motive power behind that? Why does Peter Keating have to be so anxious for popular approval? And I go into the question of a second-hander's self-esteem. That he has no judgment and he can derive his own knowledge of his value only from the approval of others. That is what makes him move deeper than that. What's the reason for a man to decide that he cannot know his value and has to depend on the judgment of others? Ultimately, his refusal to think for himself. And the issue which then Rourke presents in his courtroom speech, the creative versus the second-hander, and the whole issue of human survival. It's one against the other. So that in that sense, the characterizations in the Fountainhead can be read on as many levels as the reader's understanding will permit. If you're interested only in the immediate motivation and meaning of actions, you can see that it's one man is motivated by art and the other one by money. But if you want to see more than that, you will see what is the meaning of the choice of one or the other. And deeper than that, what in human nature is the root of this choice or that choice. Now that is characterization by essence. When you write that form of characterization, you necessarily cannot include too many particulars. You include only that which is essential to every layer of the whys, of the motives, the meaning of the motives, which you include. Observe this. Arrowsmith is an extremely intelligent presentation of the whole atmosphere of medical schools, medical careers of a certain period. I know from first-hand experience, and I've asked other people of my generation just to check up for private poll, just for my own amusement, their view of Arrowsmith today, or when they originally read it. I asked several people, and the reaction was exactly the same as mine. When I read it originally, it seemed quite interesting. Not interesting in the sense that that would not be the kind of book I like on principle. But granting the naturalist premise, there's a kind of interest in it. What kind? Precisely the kind that you would experience if you read a very intelligent newspaper interview or newspaper article about contemporary personalities. There is a certain interest in it, and there's a great deal of skill that has to go into doing it intelligently. But the interest is the contemporary and the journalistic. Once the scene changes, it becomes like last year or last decade's newspaper. And last decade's newspaper is then interesting only to the historian. If the historian approaches it, he will be approaching it for the essence of the period, or whichever he might learn about the trend of 10 years ago, what were their consequences. He will not then, unless for special purpose, be interested in every detail of the popular songs of the moment, of the cut of the clothes and ladies' hairdos. Arrowsmith is full, if you observe, of that kind of detail. And if you wanted to ask yourself, does this story apply as well to any other profession than medicine, or to medicine in any other period but the one presented, you could say nothing except the most generalized statement. You could say yes, in essence, every doctor, if he's an idealist with some independent ideas about research, every doctor would have certain kind of struggle. And in fact, every man of integrity in any profession will have a struggle, and that is about all that you can say. Because everything else in the book, but beyond the general conception of a professional idealist struggle, is specifically devoted to the minute detail of that profession and that period. But you take the Fountainhead, and any reader will know that that is not a book about an architect. It will be as timely today as it was then, even though I mentioned the years. I don't give you too much about the particular details of that period. So that you will know this is not only the story of an architect from 1920 to 40 or whichever his period, but any architect, if he is an innovator in any period, and more, any man who is an innovator in any profession. Why? Because by covering the essences, I covered the essence of the whole struggle of all the issues involved, from the bottommost, the most basic issue, which is the independent mind versus the second-hand mind. Everything that I present about the concept of Rourke and Keating, or Rourke and Toohey, can be translated in exactly the same terms, changing only the professional details, into the struggle of any profession at any time between men representing this particular human attitude. Now, it's in that sense that reviewers or critics on the naturalist premise could say that the Fountainhead characterizations are not real. That depends on your standard. They're not real if, by reality, you mean a great profusion of specific details and very little about the essentials. From another aspect, they are much more real than the characterization of Arrowsmith, because they tell you about what are the essential motives of a person, rather than what are the details of his daily life. It tells you, here is what makes a man tick, if you want the essence. But it will not tell you in detail what kind of office Rourke had, or how many shelves there were and down to the old shoe and piece of soap, or whichever he cataloged on the first description of the old doctor's office, which incidentally added up to a very good stage setting. It all conveyed what he wanted, but it conveyed it by means of the infinite minutiae. Even the office descriptions, the street description, or anything in the Fountainhead will be kept in that same style in relation to Arrowsmith. I will always give you the essentials, but not the details. Lewis will beat me hollow on the perception of details and of the particular. But the particular is all that you will get with just one or two motives under it. Now that is the difference between the two methods. Observe this. What does a naturalist do with his lesser characters? Same thing. If you take Max Gottlieb, what do you know about his motivation? Only one thing: devotion to science and contempt for worldly goods or human relationships. The counterpart in Fountainhead would be Cameron. Now, there isn't very much of him. It's a very generalized characterization. But what do I show you about him? Not just that it's a great man misunderstood by society who then brings himself to death, but behind it. It's not just a bitter idealist. It's an independent man broken by his inability to stand the malevolent universe. It's a man who could have been like Rourke, but his premises and his confidence were not strong enough. So again, I bring him, or whichever is indicated about him, right down to the basic human issue: your mind against the mind of others. In that sense, he stands there not only for himself, but for any man who, after a great devoted struggle, is broken. But you know very little about the details of his life, or of his office, or his person, or his clothes. On the other hand, Gottlieb, you know much more intimately. And you have all the kind of details of when he cooks particular kind of very delicate European sandwiches for Arrowsmith. And he talks about Father Nietzsche and Father Schopenhauer, some such expressions. And he refers to his days in college in Vienna and what kind of wonderful coffee houses they had. And then talks about science. Now, this is good characterization, mind you. If you remember this scene that early in the book, you do get the picture of this man, and you get it in much greater detail as a particular than you would get Cameron. There is nothing matching it in my presentation of Cameron to make you feel that person is so real you can almost see a photograph of it. All that you know about Cameron is the essential. I never show the smaller touches. I never show the particulars which will make him only Gothic and nobody else. Whereas Cameron is Cameron, but he is also the symbol of the great man beaten by society. Again, the essential difference, that which determines whether you draw a character very abstractly or in a detail, is in fact the number and depth of motivations which you are covering. By number of motivations, I do not mean great many conflicts in premises. No, I mean the onion skins. That is, if you have one motivation, you indicate the nature of why that, and under that, the further why, bringing it down to some very essential point. The characterizations in romantic literature are always archetypes in that sense. Only, I object very strongly to the use of the word archetype in this context, also that's what's usually used. I said when characters represent moral or philosophical issues, they're called archetypes. That is not really true, because an archetype is supposed then to be an abstraction which contains only that which pertains to that type and nothing else. The art and difficulty of romantic characterization is that you have to present the archetype, that is, that which would be typical of any individuals like Rourke, any second-hander like Keating, or any tragic figure like Cameron. You have to present that which is archetypical, but at the same time give enough specific detail so that it will be this particular Aristotelian human being and not a Platonic archetype. The characters in the Fountainhead have their particular characterizations. And the reasons why people refer to romantic characterizations as archetypes is not because the individuality is lacking, but because the abstraction shows. I mean, it shows by intention. Because the wider abstraction, the wider issue, and the deeper motivation of a certain type of man is shown, and shown in action, not just in conversation. And it is connected with the particular details of that particular personality. But those details are never accidental and are never irrelevant. Contrast that with the characterization of Arrowsmith. Now, a great many of the things are totally accidental. Accidental in what sense? In the essential sense. It's this particular doctor of this particular period. Now, the fact of his devotion to medicine is a wider issue. It is an abstraction that might pertain to other doctors or to any ambitious idealist of any profession. But the fact that he doesn't know what is the truth and that he has to forever stutter between various considerations, or that he can't get a better way to solve his romantic problems and to let the two women fight it out, which is one of the worst touches of character, that does not pertain to the issue of struggling idealist. It doesn't pertain to the issue of ambitious doctor or of anything. That is Sinclair Lewis's choice for this particular human being, but particular in the most narrow sense. It is just this man and nobody else. Do I mean this in the sense of individuality? No, in the sense of the accidental details that are present in any personality, but that have no significance whatever. That particular method is the essence of the naturalist approach to characterization. That is, that you take a man who, in essence, is a statistical archetype, whose justification is that he is a typical American or a typical Middle Western young man of a certain period. then you clutter him up, in effect, with the kind of details that will not go outside the type, but neither will they be repeated for anyone but this particular man. It has to be a chance combination of traits which may or may not be present in another man. If they are consistent with the particular statistical archetype, a good contemporary characterization is the result. You will have the feeling, yes, I've seen that type of man, literally that type. But then what comes across out of that accidental jumble of details is only the immediate motivation or two, a certain superficial view of what moves this man, plus his temporary, in the sense of time period or geographical, statistical averageness. That he represents the typical young university student or the typical ambitious medic, etc. Those are the elements of which a naturalist characterization is made. Then I'm trying to preserve objectivity, and I noticed that I said it's cluttered up with. I shouldn't use words like that, but I couldn't help it, because that in effect is what is being done. Now observe that what is done, if those are the premises, is done in Arrowsmith very skillfully. If the premise is to show you the character of a man whose universality, in effect, whose application to other men or whose tie to other men is only statistical, of a certain culture, of a certain time, then giving accidental details within the range of that particular statistical type, and then make those details as accidental as possible. Do you understand the sense in which I mean that? The fact of Arrowsmith's hesitation about women, for instance, just his. It has nothing to do with the theme of ambitious doctor, or how he acts about fraternities, or how he later decides what job to take or what. Those things are not really essential, not even in a statistical way. They are deliberately selected within the logical range of the statistical assignment to be only these men. The result of it is a kind of neither Aristotelian nor Platonic reality. It's a reality of concretes without abstractions. If a Platonic reality would be characters who only represent walking abstractions without any individuality, then an Aristotelian reality would not be concrete, which cannot be categorized into any sort of abstraction. This is neither. It is the completely unphilosophical view of man. That is what makes it the naturalistic reporting or photographing view. No writer can literally do it fully without abstraction, and in that sense, the guiding abstraction for naturalists will be, as I said, the statistical average. And since no character would be able to move without some kind of motivation, then one or two layers of deeper motives are presented, but no more than that. They are men who, in fact, do not have a real psychology. Now that may sound like a paradox, since naturalists boast that they present men as they are, whereas the Romantics are accused of going into floating abstractions and morality plays, in which there are no characters but only the abstraction of justice or the abstraction of purity or beauty, etc., with no human traits. In fact, observe that in a romantic approach to characterization, what you are given is as much human psychology in a deeper sense as the writer's ambition and ability permit. But in a naturalistic novel, you are shown great physical detail of moving figures without any real psychology. Now the same will be true of more serious naturalists, because Sinclair Lewis, in a certain sense, he's the most intelligent, the most lively, and at the same time the less deep of the better writers of the naturalist school. Now Tolstoy, for instance, is a much deeper writer in the sense of he deals with less narrow and more profound human issues, and yet is a much less intelligent observer than Sinclair Lewis. But observe what Tolstoy does. If he treats a theme like in Anna Karenina, for instance, the theme of adultery, what does he show you about the motives of the characters? As you probably know, the central conflict is the woman who's married to mediocrity, a woman of better character or stronger life energy, in effect, leaves her husband to elopes with a young officer. And they're really very seriously in love, but then the ostracism of society destroys the romance in both of them. Now, we never know anything about the psychology of any of the characters, no matter how skillfully the subtler details of each particular scene or situation are presented. All we know, in effect, is that Anna Karenina had a desire for happiness. In effect, no impatience with the kind of stadio routine conventionality of her husband. That her husband had a helpless, kind of grasping desire to hold her and helpless obedience to routine. In effect, no impatience with the kind of stadio routine conventionality of her husband. That her husband had a helpless, kind of grasping desire to hold her and helpless obedience to routine. And that the young lover was sort of dashing and he was really in love, and that's about all that you know about them. Why would a woman want happiness? What is the meaning of that? Does a husband have the right to hold a woman by sheer convention? What is the meaning of that in him? If a young man in conventional 19th century Russia, which was more mid-Victorian than any European country, as that a young officer would be so madly in love that he would defy all convention, ruin his career in order to elope with this married woman, what made him do it? Sex, passion. And answers like that. The details, the skill with which the psychological relationship are presented in the sense of who says what at what moment and how emotions are presented is very well done. From what standard? Well, you do gather that this is a strong, impatient woman or this is a weak man. And they are full of the kind of minute details which you would observe if you were watching a family quarrel or a family tragedy through a transparent wall. But what you would observe, just about an X-ray that could give you the first layer of motivation in those minds, is all that is presented. The deeper meaning of the premises, the motives of such character are never given. Therefore, it's in this sense that I say the naturalist novel has no human psychology. There are human beings who, in effect, are emotional package dealers or backseat drivers. They are the kind of people who have certain motives, and that's that. They are driven by them, and they act on them, but neither the characters nor the author ever go deeper than their immediately available or immediately conscious motivation, nor do they ever question their own souls or the deeper meaning of what is behind their souls. Why would a naturalist look at characterization that way? For the reason that we mentioned in defining that school of writing originally, for the reason of his basic philosophical determinism. If you view man as a determined being, then necessarily you don't go too deeply into what makes him move. He is what he is. You take him ready-made. He acts a certain way, and you'll say, well, then he has this kind of passion. In the case of Anna Karenina, it was a desire to live, specifically centered on her passion for this young officer. In Arrowsmith, it's a passion for medicine. Well, a man has that passion and he acts on it. That is how he is born to be. Such a question as why would he have a passion for medicine? What is the meaning of that passion? What had to go into that mind in order to make him center on a devotion to science? A naturalist would not ask those questions because they are not relevant to his view of man. He takes man ready-made. In order to take man ready-made, he has to assume that it's a determined being with certain impulses or certain motives, and he acts out those motives. That is all he can do. No deeper whys are asked. A naturalist will never look at a human being as a self-made soul. That is the concept that cannot enter this kind of philosophy. The moment the concept of free will, in any serious psychological sense, would enter into a writer's view of men, that writer is going to become a romantic writer, necessarily. When I say that the moment, I mean serious understanding of the fact that a man makes himself by his own premises and he has choices. The moment you conceive of that, you will go into the deeper motivation of a character, and you will follow his conflict deeper and deeper because you're aware that his choices go deeper and deeper. And that pertains even to romantic literature, which is not too serious. For instance, take Victor Hugo. Now, he's not a serious student of human nature. That is not his interest and his concern. He's much more the romantic dramatist, in effect. Yet, when he presents a character, let us say the nearest parallel to Anna Karenina, just for comparison's sake, I would take The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Why? Because there is the same conflict of mind and body, or guilty sex, as a general theme. And you know what the story is: the love of a priest for a gypsy girl, and that ends tragically for all concerned. Now, the way Hugo presents it, even so, he's not particularly psychologically interested in detailed study of the priest's psychology. He presents all the essentials of the conflict of a man torn between a great devotion to religion and a guilty passion for the body and for a beautiful woman. It is not then just the conflict of this priest with this dancer. Is the whole mind and body issue, or mind and soul, body and soul, that's presented by means of that story. Even if the characterizations are not too philosophically perceptive, they are built on the level consonant with Hugo's purposes in the story of showing this particular man in this particular conflict, plus the meaning of such a conflict as a religious devotion and a guilty passion. He presents the whole abstraction behind the particular conflict of this man in a way that Tolstoy in Anna Karenina would never dream of doing. Why would Hugo do it and Tolstoy would not? Because if Hugo is on the free will premise, he knows that man's actions are motivated by his choices, and that his choices are not just the immediate impulse of a particular moment, but they go deeper than that. It isn't an accident that this man is a priest. Why is he a priest? Tolstoy would not take that as sufficient motivation. Hugo. He goes deeper on this. What makes a priest? What kind of basic view of life has made this man devote all his life to religion in a very idealistic devotion? And what conflict in that devotion made him open to the possibility of betraying his religion, and why? Now, it's an issue of free will all the way down the line to the roots of the human personality. Whereas Tolstoy spends 2 volumes on the precise details of every movement and emotion and shading of voice, as a woman caught in conflict between her duty to her husband and her love for another man, and you learn nothing about what in a human psychology would put a woman in that position. All you learn is that this woman happened to be caught in it because she wanted to leave. Period. Why did she? You don't ask any why. Men are what they are born that way. Now, the depths of the onion skins, or the whys, or the motives behind the actions of a character, is the most crucial distinction between the romantic and the naturalistic method of characterization. It's for that purpose, to contrast these two, that I wanted you to read the two books. Now, next week, we'll go into greater detail about the difference between the two methods, and then how to carry them out, how to present characters which will be consistent by either method. It is not that I want to teach you to write by the naturalistic method, but the choice is yours, and I want to illustrate to you the two methods and those elements which they have in common, as all characterization would have in common, namely the way to make actions betray the motive or motives of the character, and the way to maintain consistency of action even in inconsistent characters. By inconsistent characters, I mean characters like Wayne, men with conflicting premises. Now, he does not fall apart in the way that Arrowsmith does. Yet, there's contradictions in his actions all over the place, but those contradictions are integrated to their final root. So, those are the things that we'll discuss next time. For those of you who have not read Arrowsmith, don't read in detail, but glance through it so that you will be able to ask questions and incidentally to disagree if you don't agree with my interpretation, or find reasons to read the character differently. Also, I don't want you to think that I'm just setting myself above Sinclair Lewis in that narrow personal way. The issue here is many onion skins deeper. It's the romantic versus the naturalistic, but the two novels are so similar in general things that I think they're the best direct contrast. So next Saturday, same time, same place.